Minor.
Good evening. I'm Brian Butler from the Philosophy Department. Happy to welcome you to the 7th annual Door Lecture on Art and Aesthetics. This year, we are honored to have as our Door Lecturer a world-renowned composer, writer, conceptual artist, and theorist. Paul Miller, also known as DJ Spooky, that Subliminal Kid. I see him as a particularly appropriate lecturer for the area. His work clearly relates to such honored locals as Charles Olson, Robert Moog, John Cage, and Robert Rauschenberg. Further, the Emersonian tones found in his work exemplify a profound picture of the creative process, one with wide-ranging implications in such areas as originality, identity, and copyright law. Without further ado, Paul Miller.
Hey, what's up, everybody? How you doing? Hello, hello.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I'd like to know.
are you ready for start time? Let me name a couple of music things, you know.
All right, so that was just a quick collage, all right? But what makes that even more fun, let me just play you the visual version of the same thing. Because I think once you get visual, everybody kind of gets it. It's just one of those funny moments where you can hear something, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as when you see it. So here we are. I'm going to just play. So all of that was just one song. You were hearing a harmonica, the guitar chords of the original version of the Rolling Stones, but we all know that track, right? So mixing it with break beats, remixing it with dub bass lines, the whole idea there was a reinterpretation, a recontextualization. So what you're hearing is, what I like to say is an uneasy tension between context and content. So the factory production line, looking at those fragments of movement, basically what I was just doing is making, what Andy Warhol would like to call the factory. You're making a culture of copies, and the way that art functioned with people like Warhol or artists like Jeff Koons is that the way that you look at something, it carries a lot of clout. The regard, the gaze, it looks back at you. So what I like to think of when you see that production line is not only is it something that's remote, because it's not. We all drive cars, we all wear jeans, we all have Macintosh, PCs, you name it. But the production process has changed. It's been outsourced. It's been repurposed. It's been something that essentially is no longer made along the normal ways. I mean, half the components of this computer were assembled in China. The other half were designed in Silicon Valley. The rest were designed up at MIT. The software was made at Seattle, and it was all put together in one place, and now it sits here on this desktop. So it's not about one place, but about the way they all converge. So I want to play you guys a quick film, and here we go. This film is a very funny model, and it's something one of my favorite filmmakers, Méliès, made at the turn of the last century. What you're going to see here is he's made copies of himself. Here we go.
En 1900, il y a donc presque 100 ans, Méliès représente ce qu'il était réellement dans la vie, un homme orchestre.
So what's so beautiful about that piece is essentially he made copies of himself. And there's an editing technique going on there in the same way that the Rolling Stones piece I just showed made copies and edits and splices. If anybody out there is a film director, you can kind of get the idea here is that you're playing with sequencing. And the same thing happens with sound. Every track you hear when you're out at a party or when you're at home had to be edited and sequenced, whether it's on Sirius radio or whether it's something that's on your iPod playlist. There's a kind of editing process going on. So that's the vocabulary. It's the culture of the cut, where you splice and dice these elements. You're playing with sequencing and make them, again, play in context. But it's also one of those things where you have to imagine that the sample itself is part of the vocabulary. So it's like Lego blocks. You put one clip on top of the other, and next thing you know, you get a new structure. So sampling has come home to roost. It's part of everyone's vocabulary. And it's something that everything from, I'm sure you guys all heard the song Crazy, right? That's Danger Mouse as well. He's an old associate, and I enjoy seeing that kind of pop culture reflection, but also as above, so below, whether it be the remixes of Bush's speeches, the Rolling Stones, or for that matter, hearing Nas, his new single is called Hip Hop is Dead, where he's rhyming over Inagata Devita, Anybody knows that record? It's a classic. But the funny thing is more people will hear it from the Nas version than from the older version. And I like playing with these kinds of interplays with memory. So I'm going to take you back a little bit further. Behind me you have a gentleman by the name of Luigi Russolo, who had a similar situation in 1915, but with a radically different approach. Editing, when sound and film, you got to think about what he called the art of noise. If anybody speaks Italian, it's called the arte di rumore. So he was one of the first people to come up with this idea of a sound system concept, and this is 1915. And again, the audiences were not feeling it. In fact, they were riots. People were like, "Where's the band?" You know, and that was a kind of a situation where basically you would have a whole bunch of guys cranking these what they call noise generators. And the audience would get angry, and they say, you know, that they want our money back. When there's no band. Where's the music? So he essentially created this art of noise as a response to what he called the futurist manifestos of the era. Next to him is this woman named Valentine de Saint-Point. She's one of my favorite women performance artists because she was one of the first people to think about complete atmosphere. In 1913, she would project mathematical equations on her body at her performances, and she would have, each equation would have different scent. So it's meant to be kind of poems of atmosphere or poetry made of mathematics. So she would project these equations on her body, read poetry that was mathematical, like calculus and algebra and so on, and then have this kind of scent and perfume put in the air. That was pretty wild, I would imagine, right? So these kinds of avant-garde statements are now part of the way we think about art, whether it be, you know, going to Disney and being in a simulated environment, or for that matter, when you go to a band like Sonic Youth, or you hear Rage Against the Machine, or you hear all these different bands, they are the children of noise. So the art of noise, the futurist manifestos, those are something I really like to think about as, again, if you listen to Public Enemy, they have, of course, a classic track that's just simply Bring the Noise. So sound system culture, looking at turntables, looking at loudspeakers. This is, I just did a project with Trojan Records of 40 years of Jamaican music, and they gave me access to this warehouse of this huge amount of Jamaican music. And the fun part about that is they had this whole sound system culture locked down. I mean, it's brilliant because on one level or another, they had a relationship where the band was not really the core focus. In fact, it was too expensive to bring a band around. So what they would do is record instrumental versions of what they call dub plates, and then play the instrumental version and have someone rhyme over it. And this is in the late 60s, way before hip hop. But what you can see there, if you look at the relationship, you know, sound system 1915, sound system 1968, is that the Jamaican approach was what I like to call bass minimalism. What is basically happened was that people would get the instrumental, make multiple versions of an album with the same songs, but just have different vocalists. So that was vocal sampling. And what I like to think about whenever I see these kind of old Jamaican sound system things is that essentially this was a third world economy. They didn't have the luxuries of New York or London sound studios. They didn't have the luxury of being able to record multiple takes. They had to do it on the spot and have a dub played out that night. So Duke Reed helped start Trojan Records, and there's another very renowned Jamaican by the name of Chris Blackwell, who started Island Records, which I'm sure you guys know. Bands like U2 were on that, or Bob Marley was on Island. But they both come out of this kind of sound system culture. So the update on what I was just talking about with the art of noise is that this sound system is what you shape noise. You make it become both complex on one level and accessible on another. Noise is nothing but the ear's inability to assign meaning to something. It means there's noise in a system or noise on your cell phone because your ear doesn't translate the algorithms and the codes driving that. Or when you hear your computer make a sound that you don't know about, it's noise, but it's actually organized, mathematically analyzable, and it's complex. But the point is that we assign noise value to something